Hey, friends, are you looking to add podcast guesting to your marketing plan in 2020, but don't quite know how to fit it into your already busy schedule? Listen into this episode as I chat about podcast pitching sprints and answer some of the most common questions folks have about them. Hey there, pitches. Welcome to the Go Pitch Yourself podcast with me, Angie Trueblood, a self proclaimed podcast junkie. I'm on a mission to rid the world of the crappy pitches that are filling up inboxes everywhere. Want to help? Then let's get pitching. Happy 2020, friends. I am actually recording this episode on New Year's Day, so I'm filled with a lot of excitement about the year ahead. And I've also been spending a little bit of time reflecting around 2019, which was a pretty fabulous year, to be quite honest. There were some highs, some lows, but overall, I feel like myself, my family, my friends, my business are in such a good place as we roll into the new year. So, my hope for you is that whenever you are listening to this episode, you are in a place that is filled with health, happiness, and hopefully a lot of hope for what's to come for you in the future. Before we dig in to the meat of today's show, which I'm super pumped about talking about podcast pitching sprints, I want to share a story and a listener review. So I saw a review in Apple Podcast on the Go Pitch Yourself show from my friend Enrique Hasso. And I actually met Enrique at Podcast Movement in 2019 in an Uber, I believe, on the way to a karaoke bar, which I think is hilarious. Enrique is actually the associate director of the Texas Health Education Service, and he hosts the podcast Inside Health Education. So we met, and I just feel like this is a plug for attending live events. I know I chatted in episode 9 about my visibility goals and how I go about planning them, and that live events were not necessarily going to be a big focus of mine in the beginning of 2020. But I do think there is so much value in them when they align with your business goals. And I feel like the folks that I met at Podcast Movement, at She Podcast, at Lakeside Women's Business Conference last year were able to create so many lasting relationships, not just from a business perspective, but also a friendship perspective. And I was able to deepen relationships with folks that I knew ahead of time. So, Enrique and I have not actually spoken since Podcast Movement, but we interact with each other on social. And I am so excited to have him as a listener of the podcast. I think it's always really fun when you meet people in real life and then you see that they are following the work that you do. It just makes it a little bit more special. So I definitely appreciate his review. And it was kind. He said, Angie is a true legend, which definitely makes me giggle. And I feel like that's a lot of pressure, Enrique. But he says her expertise is perfectly aligned with her passion for helping podcasters put themselves out there confidently. I absolutely love the tangible takeaways she offers and how easy they can be integrated into what I do. Love this podcast and community. So, again, I just really appreciate when you guys take the time to write those reviews. I think the jury is still out on whether or not they make a difference in other people being able to find the show. But from a selfish perspective, I really love to read them because it helps me recognize what it is that you guys take away from the show so that I can double down on it and deliver more of that content that you're looking for. So if you haven't been able to go and leave a review, I would so appreciate you doing so in whatever podcast player you listen to. Go pitch yourself on. Okay, time to dig into the really incredible topic of podcast pitching sprints. I thought this would be a great conversation for the new year so that I could share a bit more tangible tips on this concept. I know we chatted a bit about it in episode 7 with Amber De La Garza, where we talked all about productively pitching yourself. And if you haven't listened to that one, definitely go back and listen. We'll link to it in the show notes. But we talked more about the efficiencies. We talked a bit about goal setting and workflows. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to chat about what are some of the things that you should consider when planning your own podcast pitching sprint? And then I am going to answer some of the questions that some folks in our free Facebook community, Go Pitch Yourself, asked around the topic. And then also some of the questions that some of the early enrollers in the Go Pitch Yourself program asked when they enrolled back in November. So if you're not familiar with this program, because I will refer to it throughout the course of this episode, but the Go Pitch Yourself program is my paid group offering. It's a one-stop shop for teaching both the strategy and the how-to of podcast pitching as a way to grow your audience and your business. It's not just for vanity metrics and getting on podcasts, right? It's not like a feather in your cap. My approach to helping folks guest on podcasts is to grow some significant part of their business. And so that's why I created the Go Pitch Yourself program. In my business, the client side, we have a capped number of clients that we choose to work with so that we know we can deliver incredible results. But I do feel like this marketing strategy is one that people should know how to do, and that it's something that they should be able to handle in-house if it's something that they determine is going to be a long-standing part of their marketing plan. So the Go Pitch Yourself program is focused on both the strategy and implementation. A lot of times folks will have questions on just the how-to, and they totally skip over the strategy. And so I made a point of being very heavy-handed with the strategy guidance in this program. It's 8 weeks long, and I'm delivering both what my team and I do for clients, and then I'm also offering weekly Q&As so that, especially with this first round, people can get feedback on their pitch, on who they are pitching, and how to handle different follow-up scenarios. So if this is something that you would love to check out as you go into a new year, if you know that podcast guesting is something that you really want to test out, I highly recommend you check out this program so that you don't spin your wheels and you can get this part of your business up and running faster. You can head over to angietrueblood.com/program to get more information, the link to enroll, and to get all of the information on the modules and what we're covering is there. And you will need, if you're looking to enroll in the first round, to enroll by January 10th, 2020. So depending on when you're listening to this episode, it might be open, it might not be open. But if you're listening to it the week that it goes live, Go Pitch Yourself, the program is still open for enrollment. And as a way to say thank you for you guys being a fan of the podcast and for sharing it as much as you all do, I have developed a coupon code. It's podcast50. If you enroll in the program before midnight on January 10th, you can enter podcast50 and get $50 off the cost of the program. And that's just my way to say thank you for supporting me over these last couple of months. So we've got a great group of members who have already enrolled. They've listened to the masterclass. They're all prepping their bio, making sure that their social media links have some sort of continuity between them, and they're gearing up to go pitch themselves. So I would love for you to join us if it's something that you feel like would be a good fit. Now, I bring that up not just as a living commercial for the program, but really because it relates specifically to podcast pitching sprints. So, the beauty of a sprint is it is a short period of time where you really double down on something specific in your business. Obviously, in this instance, it's podcast pitching. And the make or break piece of implementing a sprint is that you can get it up and running quickly and really start executing on it. And so, for folks that have enrolled in the program, they get this sort of inside view of how to get all of the pieces of their podcast pitching strategy and workflow set so that they will be able to implement sprints whenever they feel the need in their business, and they can plan it out, knowing that they're not going to need to spend a ton of time figuring out their strategy or their pitch template, right? All of that will be created. And so it will make the effectiveness of that sprint far better than if they needed to create the whole system on the front end of the sprint. So it's highly relevant to the program because the program actually helps people get up and running faster, which, I mean, if we're sprinting, we want to do it fast, right? Okay, so let's talk first of all, what is a podcast pitching sprint? I've already alluded to it. It is a very well-defined period of time where you will consistently pitch a predetermined number of shows. So it could be Q1 is going to be my podcast pitching sprint period. And I want to pitch 2 shows per week every week of Q1. Awesome. It's a well-defined period of time and it's a predetermined number of shows. Maybe you just want to do a 4-week pitching sprint and you want to hit it a little bit more concentrated, right? Maybe you want to pitch 4 shows a week for 4 weeks. Awesome. You really just need to define those 2 metrics. What's the period of time? How many shows are you going to pitch? Now, you might be asking, okay, well, what's the goal of this sprint? Like, why do it as a sprint? The first is it's a way to increase your visibility pretty quickly, right? There's a lot of energy around a sprint. You know, there's an end goal in sight. So often you're able to kind of stick it out a little bit more than if it was just something that you said, I'm going to do this every week in 2020. But the fact that you have a beginning date and an end date really does increase the energy with which you implement it and ultimately the visibility that comes out of it. So obviously that's the goal, the increased visibility. But also it's really to get your pitching in a very consistent sort of manner. And that's going to make you even better at pitching yourself in the end because you are having such a concentrated period of time that you're doing the same thing over and over again. You're going to come out of a sprint far more able to quickly pitch yourself than if you just randomly every couple of months pitch 5 podcasts. Doing it in this concentrated period of time is really going to help you up your game in that. I mean, that's how I've gotten better at it is because I do this over and over again. And so the goal is not just to increase your visibility, but also to improve the effectiveness of your pitching because you're doing it in such a high volume over such a short period of time. Now, you might think, well, how do I set my goals for pitching? Right? Should it be that my goal is to get on a certain number of shows? And whenever I set goals, I like to set them by action items that I can measure. And whether or not a show says yes to me is not within my control, but the number of shows that I pitch is totally within my control. So initially, when you start your podcast pitching sprint, you're going to want to set your goals by what you can control, what you can measure, and then ultimately at the end, you can look back and evaluate. So after you've done this 1 or 2 times, you'll be able to say, okay, I pitched 15 shows and I was able to get on 6 of them. That gives you an idea going into your next sprint, how you should set your goals to get the impact that you are looking for. You'll also be able to look back and say, well, I pitched specifically in this one niche and it netted me this number of interviews, but in this other niche that I pitched, I was able to get this many interviews. So it can help you really tweak your sprints moving forward by collecting data along the way. So there's so much that can be gained from a sprint that you can carry into your business longer term. And you might be thinking, well, this is great, but why shouldn't I just pitch all the time? Well, I mean, that sounds great, but I know I don't always have time to consistently pitch myself for podcast interviews. I have periods of time in my business to where some periods are busier than others. And I need to be able to implement certain strategies based on when I have high periods of client work versus periods of time where I am more able to invest in marketing activities. So, one, you don't pitch all the time because you don't always have the time to do it. Secondly, you do have periods of time in your business when you have a greater need for visibility. So, for me, I have identified the pitching sprints that we are going to execute on my behalf in 2020 around when I'm marketing a group program. So that's kind of how I'm going to implement sprints. Other folks might know, well, there's a period of time where I know I need to fill my 1-to-1 spots. So I am going to pitch myself consistently and implement a sprint sort of platform. And you might be thinking, well, Angie, you said earlier that you can't use podcast pitching as a way to get business short term. And that's the case. I mean, I don't typically work with folks who come to me and they're like, I need to make this number of sales by this day because that's something that can't be guaranteed. But if you are looking to fill 1-to-1 spots by coming out hot, if you will, and pitching yourself and getting on a good number of podcasts, then you actually can get an influx of leads in a short period of time. It's totally up to you whether or not you're able to convert them. But by coming out with an increased visibility, the number of leads that comes to you just automatically increases. So you definitely can ebb and flow with your needs to fill your client docket. I know for me, the conversations that I have when I'm looking to fill my one-to-one spots are different than the conversations I'll be having when I'm sprinting around my Go Pitch Yourself program. So keep all of that in mind as we kind of go through this. Okay, let's dig into some of the questions then. So that was sort of my deep dive into what sprints are, why we should be doing them, and how to do them. But let's talk about the questions that folks that want to implement pitching sprints actually have. So when I asked this in the Go Pitch Yourself Facebook community, my free community, a lot of people asked on how to find podcasts to pitch, how to find podcasts in specific niches. And the thing that I feel like is really the underlying question here is folks not being totally clear on who they should be pitching. So before you ever consider how do I find these different podcasts, you need to get super clear on the niche that you are pitching, which is not the niche that you necessarily are in. So for me, I'm not pitching podcasts that are focused on pitching yourself for podcasts because that is not a complement to what I do. That is a direct competitor. But I know the types of people that are looking to increase their visibility through podcast interviews are folks that are looking to scale their business, right? There are folks who might be service providers and they might be looking to add podcast pitching to their list of services. Well, they would be great folks to join the Go Pitch Yourself program. So I'm definitely pitching myself for service provider type podcasts. So here's an example from a client of mine that might help you understand like how clear you need to be on who you're pitching. A lot of people will think, okay, well, the offer that I have is for female business owners, so I need to pitch business shows that are hosted by females. That's not specific enough. We need to dig in more. So, an example of how to actually know the niche that you are pitching is Danielle Hayden. She's a current client of mine. She's a co founder of Kickstart Accounting, which is a bookkeeping agency, and she's the author of the Profit Planner series, which really helps business owners get a financial education on the basics of running a business and what they need to know in terms of financial metrics to make decisions moving forward. Now, I'm not pitching her to traditional financial podcasts. The types of shows that we're focusing on are business podcasts, yes, but within specific niches. So for her, Danielle likes to work with fitness studio owners, gym owners. So we are pitching her in that vertical to where folks that are going to show up and listen to those shows are gym owners. They own some type of fitness studio and they're listening to this podcast that's focused around growing that business. And then she's able to come on as that financial expert, which is a total benefit and value add to whoever is hosting that show. We're also pitching her to shows on business that are focused on scaling. So, a lot of people, if they have an offering that's focused on business, so like even for me, podcast pitching, they think, well, this is relevant to anyone that would be listening to a business focused podcast. So, they'll kind of think of their niche as entrepreneur podcasts, but that is not specific enough. So, for Danielle, we know when are people going to start thinking about getting a better grasp on their finances? Well, a lot of times it's going to be when they're looking to scale their business. One, they need to make some decisions on scaling based on financials, right? They need to have some metrics in order to decide where they invest as they're looking to scale. And they also might be looking to totally outsource that part of their business so they can scale. So we are finding podcasts where those people who are listening are in a scaling phase. Maybe they're looking to add some sort of passive income stream to their business. Maybe they're looking to up-level their services. Maybe they're looking to grow a team. All of those people are in that state of mind where they are looking to scale and they need to know enough about their financials to move forward and to up-level their business. So When you know those types of things about who you're pitching, it's far easier to find those podcasts because you could go into iTunes and you could search for online courses. And you could probably find a couple of podcasts that focus on adding an online course to your business. And if you're Danielle, that's a relevant podcast to be on because you could talk about the financial metrics that you need to know before investing in different course platforms and how to measure the success of your course. See, you just pick the vertical and it's much easier to search than if you were thinking, I could be on any podcast focused on entrepreneurship. The more specific that you get not only helps your messaging, but it really helps your search efforts. Next, this was a question from someone who is actually in the Go Pitch Yourself program. Tori, I believe, asked this question. She said, I understand that knowing who the audience is and how I can serve them is important when pitching. Is there a way for us to determine who the audience actually is? She says, I understand this might be in the trailer episode for that specific podcast or for the show's intro, but I'm new at this and I'm not sure if I fully grasp how to do that. It's such a great question because you are going to be changing your pitch to different shows based on who that podcast audience is. And so you need to be able to rather efficiently figure that out. So my best tips on this is no, you don't need to go and listen to 5 different episodes of this podcast. Yes, you should have an episode playing as you're kind of digging in and learning more about it. But often you can get the information that you need by reading the show's intro on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast player you're listening. So look at the show's intro. Look at their website. So go back to the website that the owner of the podcast has shared on whatever platform it is. If you have to Google it, do that, but find their website and see what are they talking about on their website. If they have a really well optimized website, that landing page should tell you very specifically who they serve and how. And then next, you're going to want to go, this is my super secret way, is go find out what they're selling. So whatever it is in their business that they are doing to make them money is most likely going to be directly related to who they are speaking to on their podcast. Not always. Sometimes people's podcasts are passion projects and they're unrelated. But for the most part, if you know what's making them money, you know who they are talking to on their show. So go find out what they're selling, and then you'll get a real sense of who that audience is. Okay, the next set of questions that I always get around podcast pitching sprints is how do we make it easier and more efficient? And the key to doing this really is to set up a system that works for you. We go over this in a lot of detail in the Go Pitch Yourself program. The beauty of this program, selfishly, is that a lot of the women who have already enrolled already have pitched themselves. So some of them are coming to the program with their system already set up and they can share that with us. And so we can kind of pull pieces from everyone's system to optimize what we all do. But having a system and some sort of way to track your pitches and follow up is critical to this. So one question that I got was, do you recommend any software to keep track of emails that are not opened versus not replied to? And then do you auto send follow-up messages? It's such a great question. So the software that we use is HubSpot, and I only use that to track the emails and whether or not they have been opened. Because if I send a pitch and I see that it wasn't opened, like if it's one that I expected to have a reply back, if it's someone that I know and it's been like a week and a half and I haven't heard anything, I can go back in and see if it was ever opened. So I highly recommend some sort of tracking software to see if it's even landing somewhere and getting read. The next thing that you need to be systemizing really is your follow-up system. Now, some people use a Google Sheet. It really just depends on how complicated your pitching is. For us, my team and I currently use Trello. And so I don't use anything in our email that automatically sends emails because sometimes you'll actually pitch a podcast to one email address and then you'll get the reply back from a different one. So I would never want to automatically resend an email or a follow-up in the off chance that we get an email back from that host or someone on their team and it looks like we don't have our act together on the back end. So I don't like auto sending because of that. What we do automate, though, is in our workflow in Trello, once we have pitched a podcast, we'll go ahead and move it over in our little Trello board. And I do have Butler automated to add follow up due dates. So we can go in and see, like, okay, these podcasts are due for follow up on this date. And then we'll go in and just crank out those. And we will use the canned email feature in Gmail. We have G Suite, but Gmail has that canned response where you can basically save template emails, and we will use those with some of our follow up. So there's definitely ways to make podcast pitching easier and more systematized, but in terms of specific software that we use to auto respond, no, we don't use those. But there's lots of tips and tricks that I share and that we use on the client side of the business that we will be kind of sharing in a resource in the Go Pitch Yourself program. So definitely you want to consider, as you're entering a sprint season, how are you going to make it efficient and simple? And then finally, this is one that I actually don't get asked a lot, but I think it's super important because I was in a Facebook group, the She Podcast group, which is amazing. It's such a great group of female podcasters, and it's really a supportive network. I attended She Podcast Live this past year, and it was awesome. So someone posted in there that she knew someone that had been featured on lots of different podcasts and really had gained no business, had not seen any sort of ROI from that time investment. And immediately, I just wanted to know numbers, right? Because if you're entering a sprint, if you are taking a significant amount of time and resources to pitch yourself for shows, then you need to make sure that you have some sort of system for tracking the leads and the people that come back to you. It doesn't need to be complicated, but you should be tracking email subscribers, for instance. If at the end of your interviews you're offering an opt in, you need to have something set up to be able to track these people coming back to you and joining your email list. There's lots of different ways to do it, but you need to find one that works for you and your business. Other things that you can track, and I highly encourage you to track, would be website traffic. Track who is coming to your website from these different podcast interviews. Do you have a free Facebook community, for instance? Well, make sure if you do, and if you're guiding people to join that group, that you're asking a question before they enter of how did you find this group? It's a way for you to informally kind of gauge the traction that your interviews are getting. Make sure that if you are offering people that hear you on podcasts to schedule a discovery call with you, make sure one of your questions on that intake form is, how did you hear about me? You really want to be able to measure this stuff so that you can see what types of interviews are converting, if any are, and as you start to see patterns, you can then double down on the efforts that are working and eliminate the ones that aren't. So definitely make sure as you go into a podcast pitching sprint that you have a set of metrics and you know how you are going to track them. Okay, well, what do you do at the end of this podcast pitching sprint? Well, you evaluate what worked, right? You look at those metrics, you look at the goals that you set, you see if you met them. And then based on that, you're able to tweak this workflow, this strategy moving forward, and you repeat it. So you take the sprint, you look at everything that you did, what you were able to accomplish, how many shows you were able to get on. And then you change that around for next time. And then you look at your goals and you figure out when it makes sense to execute a sprint again. And you work it into your calendar and you change it. And every time you do this, you are going to get better at it and you should see better results. So that is my encouragement to you as to one, if you've never consistently pitched yourself for podcasts, plan a sprint. It's the beginning of the year. It's a great time to really take the bull by the horns and dig in on this visibility strategy that is not going anywhere anytime soon, and dig into it so that you can see if it works for your business. And then over time, be able to optimize it so it is a well-oiled part of your business that you can ebb and flow with as needed. Okay, so hopefully you are more clear on what a podcast pitching sprint is and whether or not it makes sense for you to incorporate this into your business as you enter either the new year or the new quarter or a new month. And I hope some of these questions that folks commonly ask me were answered for you, because if one person asked it, most likely many people have that same question. But I hope knowing the answer really helps you put some parameters around how to start this in your business in this upcoming year, because truthfully, this visibility strategy, podcast guesting, is not going anywhere. Yes, it is constantly evolving, but it's going to be around for a while. And by not getting this and implementing it as a part of your business, you're only missing out on opportunities, because likely someone in a business very similar to you is pitching themselves and is getting the opportunity to be on shows and in front of audiences of their ideal client. So I really just want you to be able to step forward into that part of your business. Now, if you are looking to do it in the most efficient way possible, obviously, I recommend the Go Pitch Yourself program. I mean, really, this program is all about helping folks get their own strategy and workflow for pitching themselves effectively. If you're hearing this again and it's before January 10th, midnight 2020, you still have time to enroll in the founding round of the Go Pitch Yourself program. So the benefit is obviously you can have some sort of influence on the direction of this program moving forward, because I am going to be looking for so much feedback from the founding members. You're also getting access to it at the most inexpensive price at which it will ever be offered, because this is a founding round. And if you're still listening, you can get $50 off of the price if you use the code podcast50 as a thank you for being a listener of the show. So definitely go check that out. Again, you can go to angietrueblood.com/program to get a bit more information, and all of the links are there to see what's included in the modules and how you can enroll. If it's after January 10th, no worries. You can still go to that page and learn more about the program. And then you're able to get on my list by accessing the roadmap to podcast pitching success, which is what the entire program is based on. But you'll get on the list so that you are notified when the doors open again. So I cannot wait to see more of you come to the program. It's such a great group to begin with. And I just can't wait to see so many people who have never pitched themselves for podcast interviews really step into this in the coming year. And I love being there to support you every step of the way. Have a great rest of your week. Alrighty, pitches. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Now it's time for you to get out there and go pitch yourself. Want a team of cheerleaders rooting you on while you do? Then pop on over and join our free Facebook community, Go Pitch Yourself. It's full of entrepreneurs just like you who are stepping up, being seen, and supporting each other along the way. Don't forget to head on over to the website for show notes, downloads, and links to any resources we mentioned in this episode. The website is angietrueblood.com/podcast. Happy pitching!